The wind howled through the trees as the first drops of rain began to fall. I was alone in the old farmhouse, a relic from my grandparents' time, nestled deep in the countryside. My parents were away for the weekend, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening. Little did I know, the storm would bring anything but peace. As thunder rumbled in the distance, I settled down with a book, trying to ignore the growing unease. As the storm intensified, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered and the temperature dropped noticeably. I heard faint whispers and footsteps, but dismissed them as the house settling. That's when I saw it. A picture frame on the mantel moved on its own, tilting precariously before falling to the ground. My heart raced as I picked it up and noticed the glass was cracked. Something was definitely wrong. The rain pounded against the windows and the thunder grew louder. I heard strange noises coming from the attic, scratching, shuffling, and distant murmurs. Summoning my courage, I grabbed a flashlight and headed up the creaky stairs. The attic was filled with old, dusty furniture and forgotten memories. As I shone the light around, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner. My breath caught as I realized I wasn't alone in the dim light. I saw an old rocking chair moving on its own, creaking back and forth. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a cold presence behind me. I turned around to find a translucent figure, its face twisted in anger. The poltergeist seemed to feed off the storm's energy, growing stronger with each lightning strike. I realized I had to find a way to appease the spirit before it unleashed its full fury. Desperate for answers, I searched the attic for anything that might explain the poltergeist's presence. I found an old journal belonging to my grandmother, detailing strange occurrences that happened during thunderstorms. According to the journal, the poltergeist was the spirit of a relative who had died in a tragic accident on the farm. The spirit had never found peace and became more active during storms, feeding off the electrical energy. Armed with the knowledge from the journal, I decided to perform a ritual to appease the spirit. I gathered some items mentioned in the journal: a piece of the relative's clothing, a candle, and a locket. I set up the items in the living room and lit the candle, reciting the words written in the journal. The wind howled louder, and the lights flickered violently. The spirit appeared, its anger slowly dissipating as I continued the ritual. Just as I thought the ritual was working, the spirit let out a final, anguished wail and vanished. The storm began to subside, and the house grew eerily quiet. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was over. But as I turned to leave, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. The spirit wasn't gone. It had latched onto me, and I was now its new vessel. The storm outside may have ended, but my personal nightmare had just begun.
The rain came down in torrents, pounding against the windshield as I navigated the winding country road. It was late at night, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. Suddenly, my car sputtered and came to a halt, the engine refusing to restart. Stranded on a desolate road with no cell service, I had no choice but to seek shelter. Through the sheets of rain, I spotted an old, abandoned house in the distance and decided to make my way there. I reached the old house, its windows dark and boarded up, and its exterior worn by years of neglect. Despite my reservations, I pushed open the creaky front door and stepped inside. The air was musty, and the only sound was the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. As I explored the dimly lit rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I found an old oil lamp and lit it, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As I settled into a corner of the living room, hoping to wait out the storm, a flash of lightning illuminated the room. In that brief moment, I saw a dark, shadowy figure standing in the hallway, its eyes glowing with malevolence. My heart raced, and I desperately tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But with each lightning flash, the figure grew closer, its presence more menacing. Terrified, I decided to search the house for any clues about the shadow figure. In an old study, I discovered a collection of newspaper clippings and journal entries. The articles detailed the tragic history of the house. A family had lived there years ago, and the father had gone mad during a severe thunderstorm, killing his wife and children before taking his own life. The journal entries spoke of a dark presence that seemed to control him, a malevolent shadow that thrived during storms. As I pieced together the tragic history, I realized the shadow figure was the vengeful spirit of the father, trapped in the house and seeking to claim more victims during thunderstorms. The only way to banish the shadow was to perform a ritual mentioned in the journal, which required items from the old cellar. Summoning my courage, I headed down to the dark, damp cellar, the air growing colder with each step. In the cellar, I found the items needed for the ritual: a piece of the father's clothing, a silver candlestick, and a rosary. Returning to the living room, I set up the items and lit the silver candlestick, reciting the words from the journal. The storm outside raged on, and the shadow figure appeared once more, its eyes burning with rage. As I completed the ritual, the figure let out an agonized scream and began to dissipate. Just as I thought the ritual had worked, the storm outside suddenly intensified, and the shadow figure reappeared, more powerful than before. It lunged at me, and I realized the ritual had only angered it further. In a final act of desperation, I grabbed the rosary and held it up, shouting a prayer. The figure shrieked and vanished, leaving the house eerily silent. The storm subsided, and I cautiously stepped outside, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. I had survived the night, but I knew the shadow's malevolence would linger, waiting for the next storm. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when we arrived at the old cabin in the mountains, eager for a weekend of relaxation and adventure. The journey had been long, but the sight of the rustic cabin nestled among the trees made it all worth it. Despite the locals and #039 warnings about the area being haunted, we shrugged off the superstitions and settled in, ready to enjoy our getaway. Little did we know, we were stepping into a place steeped in tragedy and restless spirits. As night fell, the sky darkened with ominous clouds, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees. We gathered around the fireplace, sharing stories and laughter, unaware of the storm brewing outside. Suddenly, a deafening clap of thunder shook the cabin, and the lights flickered before plunging us into darkness. We scrambled to find flashlights and candles, the storm now raging outside with a ferocity that matched the locals and #039 warnings. As we adjusted to the darkness, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, revealing a ghostly figure standing in the corner. Its hollow eyes stared at us with a mix of sorrow and anger. We screamed and backed away, but the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Heart pounding, we realized we were not alone in the cabin. The ghosts of the miners who had died in a tragic accident years ago were here, their spirits awakened by the storm. Determined to understand what we were dealing with, we searched the cabin for clues. In an old chest, we found faded photographs and newspaper clippings detailing the tragic accident that had claimed the lives of the miners. The articles spoke of a collapse in the mine during a thunderstorm, trapping the miners underground. Their bodies were never recovered, and their spirits were said to haunt the area, seeking justice and closure. As the storm intensified, so did the spirits and #039 aggression. Objects flew across the room, and ghostly whispers filled the air. The temperature dropped, and we could see our breath misting in the cold. The spirits appeared more frequently, their anger palpable. We realized we had to find a way to appease them before they claimed us as their next victims. Desperation set in as we scrambled to figure out how to put the restless souls to rest. In one of the newspaper clippings, we found a reference to an old ritual that could bring peace to the restless spirits. It required items from the mine and a specific incantation. Braving the storm, we ventured out to the abandoned mine, collecting the necessary items, a piece of ore, a miner and #039's helmet, and a lantern. Back at the cabin, we set up the ritual, hoping to finally bring peace to the tormented souls. As we began the ritual, the storm raged with even greater fury. The spirits materialized, their faces twisted in anguish and anger. We recited the incantation, and the air grew thick with supernatural energy. The spirits let out a collective wail, and for a moment, it felt as if the very walls of the cabin would collapse. But as we continued, their anger began to subside, and they slowly started to fade. With the final words of the incantation, the spirits vanished, leaving the cabin eerily quiet. The storm outside began to subside, and the air grew warmer. We had succeeded in putting the restless souls to rest. Exhausted but relieved, we knew we would never forget the harrowing experience. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, we packed our things and left Thunderhill, vowing never to return.